Everyone, I'd like to make a toast, my sister said, holding up a glass at what was supposed to be my engagement party. Standing exactly where I should have been standing, wearing a dress I recognized, because I owned the same one, to finally getting the life I deserve. I stood frozen in the doorway of the banquet hall, back early from a work trip nobody expected me to return from until the following week, watching my own fiancé slide his arm around my identical twin sister's waist like it was the most natural thing in the world. Nobody in that room had noticed the switch. Not one single person. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, hit the like button now. If you've ever stayed silent while someone underestimated you, comment here below and subscribe to Story Retribution, because today's ending proves that karma always arrives, just not when people expect it. My name is Sophie, and my twin sister Claire and I have been identical our entire lives. The kind of identical that requires other people to check for the small mole near my left ear just to tell us apart. Growing up, this created a strange, complicated dynamic between us. Claire always seemed to resent the ways our lives diverged despite looking exactly alike. I built a stable career as a structural engineer, settled into a healthy relationship pattern, while Claire moved through a series of unstable jobs and relationships, always somehow feeling like she was living in the shadow of a sister who looked exactly like her, but seemed to have things figured out in ways she didn't. I met my fiancé, Marcus, 3 years ago, through mutual friends. He was steady, kind, an architect who shared my appreciation for careful, deliberate work. Someone I trusted completely from early in our relationship. Claire met him a handful of times over the years at family gatherings, always polite, always seemingly comfortable with my happiness, or so I believed. The small betrayal happened about 18 months ago, though I didn't recognize it as betrayal at the time. Claire mentioned, casually, during a family dinner, that she and Marcus had run into each other at a coffee shop near my old apartment, chatting for nearly an hour about nothing important. I remember feeling a small flicker of unease, quickly dismissed, telling myself it was completely normal for family members to occasionally cross paths and talk. I started traveling extensively for work about a year ago, taking on a demanding structural consulting project that required 2-week stretches overseas every few months, something Marcus and I discussed carefully, both agreeing the temporary sacrifice was worth it for my career. The bigger betrayal, the one I still struggle to fully accept even now, began during those overseas trips, though I only understand the full timeline in retrospect. Claire, it turned out, had been quietly increasing her contact with Marcus during my absences, using the identical nature of our appearance in ways I never could have imagined, starting subtly and escalating over months into something I still find difficult to fully comprehend. I discovered fragments of the truth, almost by accident 4 months ago, when I returned from an overseas trip a full week earlier than originally planned, my project wrapping up ahead of schedule. I hadn't told anyone about the change, planning a small surprise for Marcus instead. I arrived at our apartment to find it empty. Marcus's calendar app, still logged in on our shared home computer, showing a dinner reservation that same evening under his name for 2. I assumed, innocently at first, that he'd simply made plans with a friend during my unexpected absence. I decided to surprise him at the restaurant instead, arriving quietly, scanning the dining room until I spotted him near the back, laughing warmly with a woman whose back was turned toward me. Her hair styled exactly the way I usually wore mine, wearing a blazer nearly identical to one hanging in my own closet at home. I felt my stomach drop before she even turned around, some instinct already understanding what my mind was still refusing to fully accept. Claire turned, mid-laugh, and the expression that crossed her face when she saw me standing there wasn't confusion. It was panic, immediate and unmistakable. The panic of someone caught in exactly the act they'd been careful to avoid getting caught in. Marcus, to his credit, looked genuinely bewildered, glancing rapidly between us. "Sophie, I thought you were—" He stopped, looking at Claire, then back at me, something shifting uncomfortably across his face. I left the restaurant without a scene that night, too stunned to process anything clearly, driving home in a daze while 100 disconnected memories suddenly started rearranging themselves into a pattern I hadn't wanted to see. I confronted Marcus the following morning, exhausted and raw after a sleepless night. He swore adamantly that nothing had happened beyond dinner, that Claire had reached out claiming she needed someone to talk to during a difficult period, that their meetings had remained entirely platonic. I wanted desperately to believe him, but something in his explanation didn't fully add up. A hesitation in his voice when I asked exactly how many times they'd met over the preceding months, a vagueness that felt deliberately evasive rather than genuinely uncertain. I decided quietly, methodically, to understand the full truth before deciding anything about my relationship, my sister, or the life I thought I'd been building. I am by training someone who verifies load-bearing calculations obsessively before trusting a structure to hold weight. I applied that same instinct here. I discreetly reviewed our shared photo cloud storage, something Marcus and I had set up years earlier for convenience, and found something that stopped me completely. Photographs from a weekend trip to a coastal town, time-stamped from a period I'd been overseas for work, showing Marcus and a woman who, at first glance, appeared to be me. I examined the photographs carefully, comparing them against my own memory of that weekend, which I had, provably, spent entirely in a different country, verifiable through my work travel records, hotel confirmations, and video calls with colleagues during that exact window. The woman in the photographs wore an earring I didn't own, styled her hair with a slight wave I never used, small details easy to miss unless you were looking specifically for them, unless you were essentially comparing yourself to your own reflection. I reached out to a former colleague of mine who worked in digital forensics, someone I'd collaborated with on a fraud-related structural insurance case years earlier, and asked him carefully to help me verify the full timeline hidden in the photo metadata. He confirmed what I already suspected. The photographs spanned several trips over the preceding 10 months, each timestamp corresponding precisely to windows when I had been overseas for work, each trip location and hotel matching not my own travel records, but check-ins under Claire's name, discovered through careful legal review of shared family credit card statements our parents still occasionally used for both of us during emergencies. Claire hadn't simply had dinner with my fiancé during a lonely moment. She had spent nearly a year quietly, deliberately impersonating me during my absences, building an entire secret relationship with Marcus, using our identical appearance as cover, timing every interaction precisely around my travel schedule. I confronted Marcus again, this time with the evidence laid out clearly. He broke down completely, admitting finally that he had known, at some point during those months, that something felt different about me during certain encounters, admitting he had suspected but chosen not to examine it too closely, because, as he put it through tears, it was easier to believe it was really you than to face what it actually meant. I was devastated, but I also understood, painfully, that untangling exactly how much Marcus had genuinely been deceived versus how much he had willfully avoided confronting would require more clarity than either of us could reach in the raw, emotional aftermath of discovery. I decided not to end things immediately, not out of forgiveness exactly, but because I needed desperately to understand the full scope of what Claire had actually done before deciding anything about my relationship or my family. I hired a private investigator, a careful, thorough man named Mr. Okonkwo, explaining the situation delicately given its unusual nature. Over the following 6 weeks, he confirmed the full extent of what had happened. 11 separate occasions over 10 months, where Claire had impersonated me during Marcus's interactions with her, 3 overnight trips, dozens of text message exchanges Marcus had believed were coming from me, all carefully timed around my legitimate travel schedule. The most devastating discovery came 3 weeks ago. Marcus, unaware of the full scope of Claire's deception, had proposed to who he believed was me during a weekend trip 2 months earlier, a proposal Claire had accepted, wearing an engagement ring that Marcus had, in his own confused, manipulated state, believed he'd given to his actual partner of 3 years. I hadn't known about any proposal. I had been entirely, completely unaware that an engagement had happened at all. That was the moment everything crystallized into something I needed to address directly, publicly, undeniably. Rather than through private confrontations Claire had proven skilled at manipulating and deflecting. Claire, apparently believing she had successfully replaced me entirely in Marcus's life, planned an engagement party 3 weeks after the proposal, inviting our extended family, close friends, all while I remained overseas on what she assumed was another extended work trip. One she had, I later learned, actively encouraged me to accept when the opportunity arose, ensuring I would remain conveniently absent during the celebration. I finished my project a full week early. I told no one. I arrived at the banquet hall that evening, standing quietly in the doorway, watching my sister raise a glass in a dress identical to one hanging in my closet, watching Marcus stand beside her with his arm around her waist, watching my entire extended family celebrate an engagement built on 11 months of careful, deliberate deception. "Everyone, I'd like to make a toast," Claire said, her voice carrying warmly across the room, "to finally getting the life I deserve." I stepped fully into the room. "Interesting toast," I said, "considering that's actually my life you're describing." The room went completely silent, dozens of heads turning toward the doorway, confusion rippling visibly across every face as they processed seeing 2 identical women standing in the same room for the first time that evening. Claire's champagne glass wavered slightly. "Sophie," she said, her voice tight, "you're supposed to be overseas." "I finished early," I said, walking further into the room, apparently just in time. Marcus's face had gone completely pale, his arm dropping from Claire's waist as understanding crashed over him visibly, watching his fiancé and the woman standing in the doorway simultaneously. "Wait." "What?" our Aunt Rosalind said, staring between us, genuinely unable to determine, from appearance alone, which twin was which. "I think everyone deserves to understand what's actually been happening," I said, my voice steady despite everything shaking beneath it. I pulled out my phone. For the past 10 months, my sister has been impersonating me during my work trips, meeting with my fiancé under my identity, building an entire secret relationship using our resemblance as cover. "That's insane," Claire said quickly, forcing a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Why would I ever do that?" I opened the photo evidence Mr. Okonkwo had compiled, the time-stamped travel records showing precisely when I was overseas versus when the coastal town photographs were taken. "These photos," I said, were taken during a weekend I was verifiably in Singapore for work, documented through hotel confirmations, video call logs with colleagues, and flight records. I turned my phone toward the room. The woman in these photos is wearing an earring I've never owned, and her hair has a wave pattern I don't style mine with. Small details, but verifiable ones. Marcus stared at the photographs, his hands trembling slightly. I knew something felt off sometimes, he said quietly, his voice breaking. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself it was really you every single time, because the alternative felt impossible. It wasn't imagined, I said. It was deliberate. Claire's composed expression finally cracked entirely. I just wanted what you had, she said, her voice rising, desperate now. For once in my life, I wanted to know what it felt like to be the twin who got everything easily, instead of always struggling while you sailed through life without even trying. I didn't sail through anything, I said. I worked for everything I have, and regardless of how unfair my life might have looked to you, that never gave you the right to steal it. Our mother, standing near the front of the room throughout the entire exchange, finally spoke, her voice trembling with shock and heartbreak. Claire, is this true? All of it? Claire said nothing, her silence answering the question more completely than any denial could have. Marcus stepped back from Claire entirely, removing the engagement ring from her finger with trembling hands, setting it carefully on the nearby table like it had suddenly become something dangerous to hold. I need to understand exactly what happened, he said quietly, looking at me, then at Claire. All of it. Every single moment I thought was you. The family reactions unfolded in stunned waves across the banquet hall after that. Our father, visibly shaken, walked toward Claire slowly, his expression a mixture of devastation and disbelief. He seemed unable to fully process. How could you do this to your own sister? He asked quietly. To someone who shares your face, your blood, your entire history. Claire had no answer, standing alone now near the small stage, the celebration around her completely unraveling, guests quietly gathering coats and bags, several approaching me individually with quiet, shocked apologies for not somehow sensing something was deeply wrong sooner. I didn't feel triumphant, standing in that banquet hall watching my sister's carefully constructed deception collapse entirely in front of everyone who mattered most to both of us. I felt something far heavier, grief for a relationship, both romantic and familial, that had been quietly, methodically poisoned for nearly a year without my knowledge, layered over a betrayal so specific and strange, it felt almost impossible to fully process even while standing directly inside it. The emotional resolution that followed wasn't neat or immediate. Marcus and I spent months in careful, painful conversations trying to understand exactly where willful blindness ended and genuine deception began, ultimately deciding, together, that rebuilding trust required more honesty than either of us had access to. In that moment, choosing to separate while both of us worked through what had actually happened during those 11 months, Claire, confronted with the undeniable evidence, eventually admitted the full extent of her deception to our parents, explaining through tears a lifetime of feeling perpetually overshadowed by a sister who looked identical to her, but seemed to move through life with an ease she desperately envied and resented in equal measure. I didn't offer easy forgiveness. Some betrayals require more time and honesty than a single conversation can provide, and I've learned, slowly, that healing doesn't require rushing toward resolution before you're actually ready for it. The final lesson settled over me gradually, in the months following that banquet hall confrontation, rebuilding a sense of identity that felt, strangely, violated in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. The specific, unsettling nature of discovering someone had worn your exact face to deceive the people who loved you. Claire had spent nearly a year assuming that our physical resemblance gave her license to become me, temporarily, to borrow my relationship, my identity, my life, whenever convenient, believing the deception could continue indefinitely, as long as our travel schedules and timing remained carefully managed. She mistook our identical appearance for interchangeability, mistook my absence for opportunity rather than trust she was actively violating. She never imagined that the sister she believed was permanently, conveniently absent would return exactly 1 week early, standing in a doorway at the precise moment her carefully constructed deception was being celebrated as a genuine engagement. I never raised my voice beyond what finally needed to be said in that banquet hall. I didn't need to. One set of time-stamped photographs, one verified travel record, and one unexpected early return did what nearly a year of careful, invisible deception nearly succeeded in hiding forever. Karma doesn't announce itself with shouting. It doesn't arrive the moment betrayal happens. Sometimes it simply arrives 1 week early, standing quietly in a doorway, watching someone else's toast collapse the exact moment the wrong sister walks into the room. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button right now. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? If you enjoy stories about family betrayal, emotional drama, shocking revenge, and the justice that always finds its way back, subscribe to Story Retribution and turn on the bell so you never miss the next story. Tomorrow's story might be even more unbelievable. See you then.